The city doesn't sleep in Chicago, it just learns to close its eyes. Tommy Briggs was nobody. For 8 years, he pedaled through the South Side on a fixed-gear bike, red thermal delivery bag strapped to his back, carrying hot meals to people who'd never remember his face. Tommy James Briggs, 28 years old, born and raised in Englewood, son of a factory worker and a nurse. His apron bore the logo of Velocity Eats, a third-tier fast food aggregator that paid him $5 per delivery plus tips that rarely came. He moved like a ghost through those streets, invisible, reliable, forgettable. He mapped the city not through landmarks but through the smells of different blocks. Fried fish on Halstead, barbecue smoke drifting from backyards, fresh bread from the Dominican bakery on 83rd. That was his life. The hum of his wheels on asphalt, the weight of meals balanced on the carrier, the distant sirens that had become the city's lullaby. Tommy was nobody, until the night he became something else entirely. The South Side breathes differently than the rest of Chicago. The air tastes like exhaust and possibility, like something burned and something about to bloom. It's a landscape of corner stores with barred windows, brick walls covered in murals of the dead, potholes deep enough to swallow a bike tire. The L tracks run overhead like metal arteries, carrying people from nowhere to nowhere else. At 4 p.m. the streets fill with school kids, mothers pushing strollers past boarded-up storefronts. By 8 p.m. the neighborhood transforms into something else, a territory where certain rules apply and others dissolve. Tommy knew every block, every alley, every building superintendent, and every priest. He knew Mrs. Chen at the corner market who always had water for delivery drivers in summer. He knew Father Martinez at St. Jude's who'd let him charge his phone. He knew the rhythm. He knew the danger. He just never thought danger would know him. He lived in a studio on 79th Street, a place where the radiator clanged like a dying instrument and the neighbors' lives leaked through paper-thin walls. Tommy had a desk. On that desk sat notebooks, dozens of them. Nobody knew he drew. He filled pages with Chicago's architecture, with faces of people he'd never spoken to, with buildings demolished decades ago. He drew the old theaters, the theaters that now stood empty, the worker monuments, the churches where nobody prayed anymore. His drawings were somewhere between blueprint and prayer, somewhere between memory and mourning. It was the only thing that felt entirely his own. It was the only thing that felt like protest. December 14, 2019. The cold had settled into Chicago like a consequence, the kind that makes your lungs hurt and your thoughts scatter. Tommy was pedaling home at 11:47 p.m. on Western Avenue, ready to drop the bike at the warehouse when the silver sedan pulled alongside him. He didn't look up. Delivery drivers learned not to make eye contact. The men emerged before the car fully stopped. Later in the hospital, Tommy would barely remember their faces. He remembered one wore a red jacket. He remembered their voices were low, professional, like they were discussing weather. They asked him for his wallet, he gave it to them. They asked for his phone, he gave them that too. Then one of them hit him. Not with anger, with efficiency. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, where Tommy lay on the sidewalk and watched a boy run past. The boy was carrying a backpack. The boy looked terrified. The men chased him. Later, the police would tell Tommy that Marcus Washington, age 12, died from blunt force trauma 3 blocks away. He'd been hit with a crowbar. The men who did it were looking for someone else entirely. The police knew who they were. Everyone knew who they were. But nobody would testify. Nobody would speak. The case went cold within a week. A juvenile found in an alley. Another statistic. Another file closed due to lack of cooperation. The city moved on. Pause and reflect when justice stops at the gates. Who dares to cross? Tommy spent 4 days in the hospital with a concussion and cracked ribs. His mother sat in the plastic chair beside his bed, crying quietly. His sister brought him soup she'd made, though he couldn't eat. The police came and took his statement. They were sympathetic enough. They told him the truth. Without witnesses, without someone willing to step forward, there was nothing they could do. The men who'd hit him, they might have been involved with Marcus. They might not have been. There would be an investigation. But investigations, he learned, were different from justice. Tommy went home to his apartment. He couldn't work for 3 weeks. The delivery company let him go. They said it was due to restructuring. He knew better. That was the first time Tommy Briggs thought about the notebooks. That was the first time he thought about doing something with all those drawings. That was the first time he thought about becoming something other than invisible. The symbol came to him slowly, like a prayer that took weeks to form. It was a small mark, a sigil drawn from his notebooks, a double circle with a lightning bolt running through it. It meant nothing to anyone but Tommy. It meant accountability. It meant that someone was watching. It meant that the absence of institutional justice didn't mean justice would not come. Tommy didn't plan carefully at first. He didn't think like a strategist. He thought like an artist. He thought about presence and absence, about visibility and invisibility. Officer Derek Chen worked narcotics out of the 7th District. He'd been caught on video 18 months earlier, planting cocaine in the apartment of a man named Raymond Torres. Torres was serving 12 years. The video existed. The department knew about the video. Derek Chen received a promotion anyway. He received a commendation. Tommy found him at a bar on Milwaukee Avenue. He didn't confront him. He simply waited until Chen left, walked alone to his car, and found a photograph taped to his windshield. A photo of himself, enlarged and printed, with the symbol drawn in red marker across his face. Under the symbol, written in Tommy's careful hand, "The city remembers." That was all. Derek Chen called the police. Nothing happened. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. But the fear bloomed inside him like a cancer. He started checking his car twice. He stopped coming to the bar. His daughter asked why he looked sick all the time. The second target was different. Alderman Robert Voss controlled development contracts in the South Side. He'd approved the demolition of the community center where Tommy's sister had learned to read. That center had been replaced with a vacant lot that had remained vacant for 4 years. Inside the community center files, Tommy had found evidence, bribes documented in spreadsheets, payments to shell companies, signed receipts. Voss's daughter attended Northwestern. Tommy found where she parked her car. One morning, she found a gift box on her windshield. Inside was a photo album, not threatening, simply factual. Pictures of her father meeting with contractors. Pictures of signed documents. The symbol on the first page. No letter, no threat, just the presentation of truth. Within a week, Voss received an anonymous letter containing the same images. Within 2 weeks, federal investigators began asking questions. Within a month, Voss resigned from his position, citing health concerns. The investigation would take another year to complete. But the silence had been broken. The testimony had been given through images instead of words, through symbols instead of accusations. Pause and reflect. When justice stops at the gates, who dares to cross? The community began to notice. People on the South Side started watching. Rumors spread like wind through the blocks. There was someone was keeping score. Someone was remembering what the system had chosen to forget. The mothers spoke about it in grocery store lines. The church women mentioned it at Bible study. The kids drew the symbol on their notebooks. The symbol appeared on walls, on storefronts, on the underpasses. It was becoming something larger than Tommy. It was becoming a voice for those whose voices had been denied. The police were confused. There were no crimes to investigate. Nothing was being stolen or destroyed. The incidents were purely informational. The truth, delivered directly. It was unprecedented. It was also, technically, not illegal. The detective assigned to the case, Maria Castellanos, understood what was happening. She was from the South Side herself. She'd lost someone too. Her cousin, 16 years old, killed in a case that never made it to trial. She understood the space between justice and the law. She understood the difference between right and wrong and legal and illegal. She didn't pursue Tommy with the intensity her superiors demanded. She watched. She waited. She understood the third target was a landlord named Stephen Kaczynski. He'd been collecting rent illegally, maintaining apartments in conditions that violated every housing code. Children in those apartments had developed respiratory illnesses. One child, 6 years old, died of an asthma attack in a bedroom where black mold covered the walls. The city had cited him. He'd paid fines. He'd continued the practice. He'd settled lawsuits with payments that were less than his profit margins. Tommy researched for 3 weeks. He photographed the apartments. He collected medical records, testimony from mothers, documentation of code violations. He compiled everything into a thick envelope. He sent it to every newspaper in Chicago. He sent it to the state attorney. He sent copies to 5 different nonprofits focused on housing rights. He included the symbol on each envelope. By the end of the month, Kaczynski had been arrested. The state was building a criminal case. But Tommy had made his first mistake. One of the mothers he'd spoken to, Maria Delgado, was questioned by police about her contact with the person distributing the information. She was terrified. She had an outstanding warrant for a probation violation related to a conviction from years before. She was vulnerable. When police pressed her, asking for details about Tommy, she became confused and frightened. She gave incomplete information, details that could have identified him. Maria was also sick. She had lupus, and the stress triggered a flare. She collapsed on her apartment floor while the police were still there. The ambulance came. She was hospitalized. Tommy visited her once in the hospital, his face hidden in shadow. He promised her the warrant wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter because he would make it matter. It was then that Tommy realized the weight of what he was doing. It was then that he felt the cold shadow of consequence. Pause and reflect when justice stops at the gates. Who dares to cross? The fourth target was Detective Raymond Hughes, a man who'd covered up violence committed by officers under his command. Tommy had evidence, testimony from 3 officers willing to speak, if given anonymity, documentation of altered reports, medical records that contradicted the official account. This time, Tommy moved differently. He didn't send photographs. He went directly to a reporter at the Chicago Tribune, a woman named Stephanie Kim, who'd been reporting on police corruption for 5 years. He sat with her in a coffee shop, face obscured, and told her the story. He gave her the evidence. He gave her the contacts. He gave her everything she needed. Kim did the work. She conducted the interviews. She verified the documents. She wrote the story. It ran on the front page. Within a week, a federal investigation opened. Hughes was placed on leave. The case was moving through the system now, no longer dependent on anonymous deliveries or symbolic gestures, but on journalism and due process. It was how it was supposed to work. It was how it could work. Tommy realized, if someone was brave enough to step forward. The 5th target was different. The 5th target was personal. The men who'd killed Marcus Washington, the men who'd hit Tommy on that cold December night, had been promoted. Both of them. They'd joined a specialized unit. They were making 6 figures now. The system didn't prosecute them, because the system was them. Tommy had video footage from a building camera of their second crime, an unjustified stop that had turned violent, a man beaten simply because he'd talked back. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Tommy gave it to every news station in the city, simultaneously. He packaged it with the symbol. He made sure it couldn't be ignored. The story exploded. Social media erupted. Within 72 hours, both men were suspended. Within a month, they were arrested. The trial would take time, but they were facing prosecution. They were facing consequence. The machine had finally noticed. The system had finally responded. But there was a cost. The 6th person wasn't a target. The sixth person was innocent. His name was David Park. He was a young alderman, newly elected, genuinely committed to reform. Tommy had confused him with another man, a man with a similar name involved in corruption, and he'd left evidence on Park's doorstep, photographic evidence, symbolic threat. Park had panicked. He'd tried to run. He'd driven recklessly. He'd crashed his car. He'd spent 3 weeks in the hospital with multiple fractures. It was an accident, but it wasn't. It was consequence. It was collateral damage. Tommy sat in his apartment that night and understood finally what he'd become. He'd become the very thing he'd been fighting against, someone operating outside accountability, outside oversight, guided only by his own judgment. He'd become judge and executioner. No matter how symbolic the execution, no matter how pure his intentions, he didn't stop, but he changed. He stopped acting alone. He went to Stephanie Kim and confessed. He told her everything. The reporter faced a choice: burn her source. A source who'd delivered real justice, who'd changed the system in measurable ways, or protect him and become complicit. She protected him, but she told him the truth. He had to stop. She said, "You've started something, something real, but you're not the one who should finish it. The community is. The people are. You've given them a voice. You've broken the silence. Now you have to trust them to speak." Tommy understood. He knew she was right. He began teaching what he knew. He started working with community organizations. He helped others compile evidence. He trained people to document corruption safely, to preserve evidence legally. He became infrastructure instead of instrument. He became method instead of message. Pause and reflect when justice stops at the gates. Who dares to cross? The detective Maria Castigonis finally brought him in, not with an arrest, but with an interview. They sat across from each other in a room with a camera running. She told him she knew. She'd always known. She told him that he was lucky she understood what he was trying to do. She told him that luck runs out. She told him he had to choose: continue and face federal charges, or step away and let the system do its work. She told him that the system was finally listening. 3 of his investigations had resulted in criminal convictions. 2 had resulted in policy changes. 1 had resulted in a settlement that was being used to reimburse victims. The system was working, she said, but only because he'd forced it to. If he continued, the system would turn on him. The machine would crush him. The silence would return. He had to trust that the machine could be changed from within, even if he couldn't see how. She released him that day. No charges, no record, just an understanding. Tommy Briggs walked out of that police station into the Chicago afternoon, and the symbol that had appeared on 1,000 walls was already beginning to fade, but it had done its work. The city had changed. The story had spread beyond Chicago. Journalists and activists in other cities had picked up the symbol, had begun their own investigations, had begun their own systematic exposures of corruption and injustice. The thing Tommy had created was no longer his. It had become a tool for others. It had become a movement, and Tommy had become invisible again, but this time by choice. He went back to delivering food, but not with bitterness. He worked with legal aid organizations. He taught community groups how to document evidence. He learned the law, formally, taking night classes. 5 years later, he became a paralegal. 8 years later, he was studying to be a lawyer. He never drew again, not the way he had before, but sometimes, late at night in his studio apartment on 79th Street, he would sketch buildings that had been demolished, theaters that had been forgotten, monuments to workers who'd long since passed. He would sketch them with the symbol hidden in the margins, barely visible, a mark that meant someone was paying attention. A mark that meant someone cared. A mark that meant the city was being witnessed. The last reported sighting of the symbol on the South Side was in 2027, 3 years after Tommy had stepped away. It appeared on a wall near the corner where Marcus Washington had been killed. It appeared overnight, in perfect red marker, exactly as it had been drawn hundreds of times before. But Tommy wasn't there. He was in a law office downtown, arguing a case before a judge. He was doing it legally now. He was doing it within the system. The symbol had trained the city to expect accountability. It had trained people to demand justice. It had shifted something fundamental in how the community saw itself and how the system saw the community. When Tommy heard about the symbol appearing one final time, he felt something release inside him. The work was complete. The story had ended, and the silence had been broken. If this story made you think, subscribe. More untold truths await. The South Side continues to transform, not through violence, but through the courage of ordinary people who refuse to be invisible, who decide that the system must answer, who understand that justice, real justice, sometimes requires one person to step beyond the boundaries of law, to force change, and then to step back and trust the people to continue. Tommy Briggs never became a legend. He became something quieter and more powerful, a catalyst. A reminder that every neighborhood has someone watching. Every city has someone who remembers what the powerful want forgotten. Every story of injustice already contains the seeds of its own confrontation. You're watching Urban Justice Noir. The truth, when spoken, burns under city lights.